Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Ian Bruce and this is Interviews from Quito, the programme in which we look at some of the big challenges facing this country and the region. In today's programme, violence against women. Hardly a new issue, but one that's come to the fore recently here in Ecuador, partly because the problem itself seems to be getting worse, partly because the government has adopted new measures to deal with it, but mostly because here, as elsewhere in Latin America, a new, diverse and vibrant movement of young feminists has emerged to confront it. To discuss this, we're very pleased to have with us Anais Cordova, who's one of the members of the movement Vivas Nos Queremos. But first, let's look at this short video.
La violencia machista en Latinoamérica, si bien sí tiene una forma característica, también responde a las diversas luchas y organizaciones que estamos haciendo las mujeres ahora.
Quisiera tener cosas dulces que escribir, pero tengo que decidir y me decido por la rabia. 5 mujeres hoy han sido asesinadas y a la hora por lo menos 20 mujeres violadas. Eso solo es un
no solamente las que salimos y nos organizamos en marchas y en espacios más visibles, sino las de cada mujer cotidiana en su casa. Esta lucha por estudiar, esta lucha por trabajar, esta lucha por romper el modelo estereotipado de lo que tiene que ser una mujer en la sociedad.
Soy como las otras, hartas de andar con miedo, agresiva porque es la forma en que me defiendo. No tengo privilegio que proteja este cuerpo.
La potencia más grande que tiene el feminismo como lucha transformadora es que no solo plantea la transformación social de un mundo y un sistema, sino su propia transformación social. El feminismo interpela también a las propias prácticas políticas que uno tiene. Y creo que eso es fundamental, porque además interpela la vida concreta de las mujeres.
Cuando se enfermó tuvo que mandarle un hospicio. Esto va por mí porque a los 15 años me atravesó la cara un golpe desde su mano. Porque ningún humano se hizo presente el día que un delincuente me dejó.
No creemos que el feminicidio se trate únicamente de crímenes concretos, de personas concretas, sino que creemos que es un modelo institucional, que es una forma, ¿me entiendes?, de ubicar y de decir a las mujeres cuál es el lugar que te corresponde, mucho más en una región como la latinoamericana, donde tenemos como varios problemas. Por un lado, esta imagen del macho latinoamericano duro, pero por otro lado también toda esta imagen conservadora religiosa que culpabiliza a las mujeres de todo lo que pasa por no estar en la casa, que además tiene un estereotipo de lo que tiene que ser una buena mujer, que es constantemente repetido. Creemos que toda la violencia feminicida tiene que ver también con una respuesta social de un sistema que se niega a ser transformado.
Porque vivas nos queremos, no tenemos miedo, no queremos a ni una menos. Díganme loca, histérica y exagerada, pero hoy canto en nombre mío y el de todas mis hermanas. No nos acusen de violentas, esto es autodefensa.
Porque nos queremos vives, porque nos queremos libres y porque queremos cambiar este sistema capitalista patriarcal que nos oprime.
Thank you for joining us, Anais. You describe yourself as a human rights advocate. You're also, I think, an ecologist, a photographer, a poet, and you were one of the organisers of that march we just saw on the 25th of November. Now, there was a lot of emphasis on that march on numbers, on the scale of the problem of violence against women here in Ecuador. So let's just start with that. Describe to me, what is the problem here in Ecuador?
Well, there are many problems in the whole region, but in Ecuador we have, for this year, 2017, 134 women that have lost their life because of femicide, because of macho violence. So that's a huge problem because those women are not numbers, are people that are not with us and have a family. So we have orphans, we have family that have break because of this pain. And we also don't have a response from the justice system. So we have a lot of problems with that, with following the cases and for winning the cases. So the problem has become so big that women, we are tired of being treated like objects in the streets, and starting with the small violence, going to the most extreme violence, like is femicide. So that's why.
Can you just describe what kind of violence, what kind of situations are we talking about here?
We are talking about not giving the response in cases of going to places and putting a demand because of violence, for example. Talking about, violence in the same relationship that is not taken care of. So we have 6 of 10 women in Ecuador being victim of violence, of many kinds of violence. We also have violence like economic violence. So we know that that women are poorest than men in Ecuador. And also we have a huge problem with media, because we still are having violence and stereotypes being passed through media. For example, this year we didn't have a cover by media. Last year we have a huge cover.
You mean coverage of the demonstration?
Of the demonstration, of the cases, the different cases that we are following until we get justice, we follow the cases. So this is a show of how extremist and religious movements are going for this crusade in the whole region. So that's a really huge problem, because we have a problem in human rights. We are always advocating for human rights, right? And especially for women's rights. But now we have this problem with especially not giving the place to talk, not giving the voice. And that's a huge problem, because it's taking out of the panorama the whole violence, right?
I want to get onto that issue of the sort of surge in the right here in Ecuador. But just going back to the numbers, I mean, 134 this year. How does that compare with previous years?
There's a huge problem about statistics, because the last formal information from the government, the last statistic systems that we have was in 2012. From then on, all the organizations of women organizations, we've been taking the cases and being like an observatory of women rights. So this last number, we start counting the victims of femicide and violence and macho violence from January until November. So this number that I'm telling you is from January until November. Last year, we had, in 3 months, 188 victims. So it's a huge number, especially for Ecuador.
But I suppose I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously gender violence is not new. You know, it's been around for a very, very long time. Yeah? I mean, can we be certain that it's actually getting worse? Or is it maybe just being better reported, you know, the numbers being counted better? I don't know.
Yeah, it's
so
worse.
Is it more domestic, less domestic? I don't know.
It's both. It's both, but I mean, the crimes are worse. I mean, before you could have, I don't know, I don't want to put a scale into violence, like this is worse than that, but they are more cruel. I mean, you just not have crime of assassination. Is also a crime where the victim is first taken out of the house, then you have assassination, then you cannot find the victim. You see, it's like
more vicious.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost.
Exactly, that's the word. Yeah. So that also is a response from the macho system, from the patriarchy system, to what women have been saying. I mean, when women start arising in the whole region from last year until this year, then you have a worse response. So when you rebel, what you get is a punishment. So this is kind of like, this is a exemplary punishment. So other women will not rebel, but then women start raising their voices and getting organized. And that is making someone piss off. That someone is patriarchy.
So just tell me a bit more about these patriarchal groups. I mean, you're talking about specific, I mean, not general patriarchy in the society, but some specific organizations, movements?
Well, maybe general also, but there are one specific that are the people from the extremist groups that we call extremists or anti-rights, because they are against human rights, especially against women human rights. And this last year we have seen an rise of misogynist demonstrations in the internet, for example, in our same pages, in Vivas Nos Queremos, Ecuador.
For example, what kind of thing?
Like, don't talk about them, you should all be killed, things like that. Really, really hard things to, I don't want to repeat them actually,
Sure.
But this kind of comments didn't came last year, because last year people was like getting aware of the situation, and these groups, these extremist groups that went in a march the 14th of October here in Quito, became, and it's like they legitimized especially this hate speech, right? So they are talking about hate to women, not to preserve the natural family, and things like this.
You're talking about those big demonstrations, I can't remember, a few months ago, was it?
Yeah.
In Guayaquil, was it, or was it here?
Was in Quito and Guayaquil, but the Guayaquil one was the biggest one.
So who's behind those movements? I mean, where
religious groups, not all religious groups, the most extremist religious groups, and also conservative groups of power, right? So it's really crazy because we have a law that is gonna, we hope it will pass in Ecuador. It's a law for taking out the violence against women, and these groups are against that law. So these groups are against women living a life of freedom and love and caring, you know, living a life at all. That's the whole point. So it's kind of crazy that you have these extremist groups, not only in Ecuador, but in the whole region, imposing their beliefs. They have the right to believe anything, right? But not taking that to the state or to making that, you know, like laws about them.
I wanted to ask you about this law because it was passed, I think, or was debated almost the same day, or very, very close to the moment of that, of the march on the 25th of November, right? This is the law proposed by the current government, the law for the eradication of violence against women, I think it's called, yeah?
Yeah.
So tell me about the law. I mean, what does it say? What does it do?
It has like 3 parts. One part that talks about preventing violence, a second part about how the systems should work. You have like an economic system, a health system, a justice system, and they all should work together. And a third part that is
together to do what?
To prevent violence and also to respond when women go and put a demand to someone because of violence. And the third part is about repairing the women's life. So talks about, for example, of psychology help.
For women who have suffered violence.
Yeah. So it's a law that we were waiting, like I mean the women's group, feminist group, because we attend all these cases and we know that the system goes really slow, so we needed to go faster. So it's a law that we wanted to pass, even though we need more things in that law. There's not like a great law.
Is the law adequate?
It is pretty much, but we need more because, you know, there was a problem through the discussion of the law, and was that this extremist group went to protest and this march and everything. So they got, for example, gender out of the law. So that's a problem because I don't know if you remember, but in the the other century, women movements, we did this of putting gender and making gender the construction of roles into the society that is gender more in the agenda, so we can get equal rights, right? But now these groups are taking out gender and taking out the idea that we are equal.
I think some women were complaining that at the last minute they reinserted the issue of criminalizing abortion. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We went to the assembly and we saw the last minute laws that they were trying to pass, and they tried to pass a law that takes all the legalization of abortion from Ecuador. So in Ecuador, it's legal to have an abortion if you are a person with disabilities and you've been raped, for example, or if the life of the woman is in danger, so you can get an abortion in those cases. So it didn't say anything else about abortion, the law, even though we wanted to have more things about abortion because it's a health public topic and issue. But they tried to take those that are like the most, I don't know, basic ones out of the law.
And did they, so where's that at now? What's the situation with the law now?
They pass it, but then one of the congresswomen, she took it out. She took all these last minute things out because there was another part of the law, another law that they wanted to pass that was to prevent girls especially girls that are under 15 years, to put demands in cases of sexual violence. They only want them to put demands in the case when the parents, in the case that they have the sexual violence, and they should go and demand with the parents. So that's a problem, because you have 80% of the parents of these girls, from the girls that have suffered sexual violence, that are the perpetrators, that are the aggressors. So it's a problem when you have to demand your aggressor, but you have to go with your aggressor to make the demand. It's not, doesn't make sense, right? So that was another law that was taken off. So those are both. So we get like, well, there are women in all their diversities that are in the law, but there's a problem because they are not specified. For example, trans women, they are not inside the law, for example. And that's a problem because trans femicides are happening every day in Ecuador. A woman is killed by femicide in Ecuador every 56 hours. And we don't have numbers about trans women. So that's crazy.
It must be much higher.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know, because we don't have numbers. And it's not just numbers. We are not just, we are trying to do this, you know, taking account of what is happening with trans women, but the government is not taking this in account. For example, when the demands of the corpse comes to their system, right? So that's a problem also.
Well, I mean, what do you think the responsibility of government is in this? I mean, that demonstration on the 25th ended with a sort of symbolic trial of the state.
That was what I wanted to say, yeah. Which
is sort of paradoxical in a way, at the same time that you're sort of welcoming a piece of legislation that the state is passing, you know. So, I mean, how do those two things, you know, how do you see the responsibility of the state, and to what extent is it doing what it ought to do?
We are the people, and we are the ones that do everyday demonstrations, and we follow the cases, and we are the women that are going to these trials and trying to get justice. But justice is taking very long, and justice that takes so long is not justice for us. So we were trying with this kind of performance, that is this popular trial that you said, to create a new way of justice, because we know that some cases are not taken account. So we are demanding from the state that they should make our cases faster, going faster, and put more resources in women's lives, prevention of violence, making violence cess, right, like this. And also we are expecting from government to give us more response when we want to win a trial, when we say there is something weird because of the trials and, you know, in the cases, because we see a lot of problems. There may be not a problem in some system, but in another is, so you have to. So we are always looking, and our role in the society is to be like this observatory, right, of what is going on, and demand always more from the government, from the state, more than the government, from the state. So it's fine, the new law, it's fine, but we are gonna see if that goes to action, because there are a lot of laws, but they are not passing to action, you know?
I mean, there was just a few days ago, the Uruguayan Congress was debating, I think at least the lower house, I think, passed also a law against violence against women. And do you think this sort of this kind of legislation that seems to be happening in some countries in Latin America is a product of this new feminist movement that's emerging in the continent, or?
Yes, but it may be not that new. It's because we are organizing from the last century all the way till now, and we are more, and we are, I don't know if we are more anger or we are more like, we want more, you know?
But it's new, at least in the sense that there's a new upsurge of mobilizations, you know. I think particularly in the last year and a half, since the Ni Una Menos, the Not One Less movement in Argentina sort of served as something of a, you know, a catalyst, I think, across the region. So it's certainly stronger, isn't it, now than it was 3, 4, 10 years ago?
Yeah, actually they are. And yes, it may be a response because, like we were talking before, also the patriarchy violence is a response, like, for our way of living, for our new role in the society, for our new rights that we are demanding. So yes, I think these groups are like trying to take out our rights because they see that we are achieving something and that we are not less, that we are a lot and we are connected, and it's not just in Ecuador, it's regional.
I mean, you said maybe it's not so new. Let's think about that a bit more. I mean, all right, it's new maybe in the sense that there's, you know, it's mobilizing again, but how would you characterize this new, if that's what it is, feminist movement? I mean, what are its main features?
We are organized and we have something really cool that is internet. We are cyber feminisms also. There are a lot of cyber feminisms and cyber activists. So we are in that area also, and that makes us more connect. We have a network, so we know when something is wrong, we are responding to that. For example, before in the other movement in the 95, for example, in Ecuador, when the first law against women was passed, women were...
Which law was that? Which law was that?
Which year?
No, which law? What law?
The first law against violence against women.
Okay.
Yeah, that was in the 95. That was a law that my mother and all my grannies were fighting. They passed this law with, you know, talking to women and using television and doing a lot of work in streets, in neighborhoods, etc. We do the same thing, but we have the internet. So we make them more organized and more like fast, so we can respond faster. For example, the 8th of March, we organized it from Argentina till Mexico, passing through Colombia, passing through Peru, passing through Ecuador. So it's not just Ecuador now, right?
Right. How does that feed off, you know, from one country to another? Is that just about the internet? Is that why it works?
No, also because we have Congress and we see each other and we know our job, so we are like making this network not just for doing demonstrations, also everyday work. Something that works here can work in Colombia. So we share that information. Sharing information is very important in this new movement.
I mean, in that second wave of feminism, you know, a lot of women of my age, on the sort of radical side of that movement, regarded themselves as socialist feminists. You know, there were different currents, you know, and so forth. But you know, that's not a term I hear very often now. People don't call themselves socialist feminists in this movement now?
No, I think it's like another moment, because there are like, I've seen ecofeminists, for example, that is a new feminism that has emerged. There are also anarchists and anarcho-feminists. There are feminists and girls that want to define their own way of feminist. They don't like this kind of, you know, like saying I'm this or this. I am a feminist and I like feminisms. There's also a very powerful movement of feminists that are, we call ourselves abortistas. So we defend abortion, and we defend autonomy and doing ourselves things. So, and the cyber feminisms also. So I think there's this diverse movement. It's very important because we are together and we are fighting for a same cause. Even though we come from different backgrounds in politics, there are also social feminisms, of course, but we come from different backgrounds, but we have something in common, that is equality, and we are fighting for that. And we know and we recognize violence. So that's very important. We have like come to these, you know, places where we agree. because we have a dialogue, and that's very important now.
But I mean, we saw in that video, I mean, there was also an identification of patriarchy with capitalism, at least among some of the young women in this movement, you know? So I'm just wondering whether the difference is really one of language and form, and maybe the content is actually not very different from, you know, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, patriarchy and capitalism are almost the same, of course, but I think there is a problem with the socialist movement that haven't recognized feminisms. So that makes feminists go out of that socialist movement and say themselves, I am a social feminist, but first of all, I am a feminist. You know, so we can have this speech and this treatment of the speech like we know that patriarchy is the same that capitalism, and in a capitalistic society you have more patriarchy and more violence because there's like economic violence that is completely associated to that, right? But the thing is that the socialist movement haven't showed, not all of it, but most of it they haven't showed this solidarity for women that were part of that movement. So lots of women said, I'm a feminist first and then I'm a socialist, or I'm a social feminist, but I don't want to be mixed with that establishment of the macho order in the socialist movement. See?
Okay. So here's a rather big question just to end on. You know, so you're talking about very concrete demands against violence, against violence for abortion rights and so on and so forth. And then you have sort of capitalism identified with patriarchy. You know, how do you get from those sort of concrete struggles now to addressing the sort of the problem behind it all, patriarchy, capitalism? How do you move between those two things?
We have created, I don't think we created, but we are applying, we accompany cases of violence, and we are not doing the same thing that we used to do. You know, we are trying to create more things. We are more creative about the art we do, and also we are looking for funds and things like that, and using money just to make and to build our movement. So I think like thinking and creating and action, the way that we move around violence and we treat violence and we treat between ourselves and our relationships have changed, and that makes a society change. That makes, and we are starting from our community, and we are starting from the community that we accompany, right? For example, the victim of violence. So they change their family. We all become more like have these reflections about capitalism, about money, about how the system works, about the violence. So that's changing really slow, but really deep change, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Anais. We've been talking to Anais Cordova from the new, or the young, maybe not new, but certainly the young feminist movement here in Ecuador. And as we heard, that's part of a regional movement that certainly has been growing in the last year or two. That's all we have time for now. We'll be back next week with another program here on Interviews from Quito. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you.
The ruling world order has